So hello again and welcome. You're joining us for the Reading League Vermont's Adolescent Striving Readers, Instructional Opportunities and Systemic Approaches with Dr. Julie Brown, who we are thrilled to welcome. My name's Lori Quinn, and I am part of the small but mighty board of the Reading League Vermont, a chapter of the national organization, the Reading League, that is housed here at the Stern Center, where I serve as the president of the nonprofit Stern Center based in Williston. It is a joy to welcome Julie today. We have a long history with Julie Brown at the Stern Center, and Julie was really a pioneer in understanding the crucial importance for adolescent learners of literacy. And I personally have great admiration for her insistence and determination as an educator that this be part of the success stories of our high school graduates in particular. And you may have had an opportunity to read a little bit about Julie if you don't know her already. She is the founding teacher of Woodstock Union and Middle High School Structured Literacy Program. She's a licensed special educator, reading specialist, and MLL teacher. Julie's held just about every role you could imagine at Mountain View's Supervisory Union in Woodstock. She is also a founding member of the Project for Adolescent Literacy, which is a nonprofit advocacy group for educators, by educators who are committed to helping older struggling readers. And so that organization is about getting the word out about what is possible and what works for reaching student success in partnership with the students who you will see throughout Julie's presentation today. And as I mentioned, her doctorate recently earned, yay, is from Mount St. Joseph's Reading Science Program, and she also holds a Master of Science in Language and Literacy from Simmons. And I don't want to leave out the last line of your bio, Julie, which is that your students are your inspiration, because I know that to be true from personal witness to this awesome group of young people that you have helped so much in their educational careers. So we're delighted on behalf of the Reading League Vermont to welcome Dr. Julie Brown.
Thank you so much. The Stern Center has played a big role in my personal life, my family's life, and my professional life. So this opportunity to contribute to your mission is, I'm just very grateful for it. So let's get started. Adolescent Striving Readers, Instructional Opportunities and Systemic Approaches. As Lori mentioned, I'm the pre-K through 12 literacy facilitator at Mountain View's Supervisory Union in Woodstock, Vermont, and a founding member of the Project for Adolescent Literacy. And I would like to just frame literacy, the ability to read, write, speak, and listen, the ability to communicate with others and one's self at levels commensurate with increasing levels of maturity and sophistication, supports an internal and an external life of meaning and substance. In other words, I believe teaching literacy is more than just a state standard. It's more than just an intervention class for struggling readers. I believe it's the keystone of an education. So let's get started. What are we talking about today? We're going to be focused on deepening our knowledge of adolescent striving readers, students in grades 6 through 12 who are not yet proficient readers. So adolescent literacy crisis, I think, is defined by decades of goodwill, concerted efforts at finding solutions, and stubbornly stagnant outcomes. I would like to posit that we need to understand the problem better if we hope to implement more effective instruction. So we'll be talking about instructional opportunities, looking at some research, deepening our understanding of instructional needs of adolescent striving readers in particular. And then we're going to look at some whole school responses to improve outcomes with evidence-based, effective instruction that meets students' needs. Okay, so what do we know about striving adolescent readers? How many students are we talking about? What kinds of challenges are limiting their success? What kinds of instruction have evidence of effectiveness? Let's review some national and international data points. So first of all, we know there are far too many older struggling readers and that we can't intervene our way out with so many students struggling. So in 2019, the National Center of Education Statistics reported that almost 1 in 3 high school seniors struggled to understand grade level texts at even the basic level. So 30% of high school seniors demonstrated below the basic level of literacy skills. 50% of Black 12th grade students below basic, 62% of students with disabilities below basic levels of literacy after 12 years of schooling. So also below basic, 19%, almost 1 in 5 students who enrolled in a 4-year college below basic. 51%, more than half, of students entering a technical training program below the basic level of literacy, and 33% of students considering the military. There are no descriptors for what below basic literacy means other than not attaining basic levels of literacy. And you can follow that link at the bottom to get a more detailed description, but we're talking about being able to place events in order and draw general, factual, literal conclusions from what they're reading. We also know that high school students' reading difficulties don't just dissipate upon graduation, they persist into adulthood. More than half of the 16 to 24-year-olds in the United States who took part in an international assessment of adult literacy scored below proficient, and assessors described 1 in 6 as functionally illiterate. We know that low literacy and illiteracy has a high cost. It is correlated with adverse effects on individuals' social, emotional, health, and economic well-being. The Department of Justice put out a report in 1993 calling on schools and colleges who prepare teachers to act to improve literacy, and noted that delinquency was, quote, welded to reading failure. It's been estimated low in illiteracy to cost the US economy $2.2 trillion annually, almost 10% of our GDP. And we know that high levels of literacy are required for civic engagement. One study by Parker found that 74% of state-level ballot initiatives in 2022 were written above the high school level. We also know that low and illiteracy is a growing and global problem. UNESCO reported that more individuals face lives with below basic levels of literacy than 50 years ago, 750 million. So these are some sobering statistics. Let's bring it a little bit closer to home and look at Vermont. So Vermont's National Assessment of Educational Progress, or the NAEP, data from 2024 indicated that 1 in 3 Vermont 8th graders are below or demonstrated below basic levels of literacy. And 47% of economically disadvantaged 8th graders in Vermont. It's very sobering numbers. You can see in these charts, here is, let's see if I can add I need my little pointer. Let's see if I can get that. I don't know if I can get it. Let's see. The chart on the left shows Vermont's scores over time, and you can see that the gray, the below basic category, is growing, not diminishing. And you can see on the right here, this graph, the tan line is Vermont, and you can see the nation, the black line, is also declining at the 8th grade level. Vermont's more precipitously so. So why, when research and results from the field suggest far higher numbers of students can achieve proficiency? And why, when we understand the high costs of low and illiteracy to persons and society, do we as a nation and a state allow this crisis to fester? Part of the answer could be that as a field, we may not accurately understand the instructional needs of these students, and educators may be unfairly inadequately prepared to meet those instructional needs. I think it's important to frame this of how we got there. So allow me to just give a little bit of a background. A series of highly influential reports from the early 2000s may have shaped the narrative that's alive and well in high schools today. And that narrative is that most older struggling readers can read words accurately, but they cannot comprehend what they read. The Reading Next, A Vision for Action and Research in Middle and High School report of 2004 stressed that in considering how to improve the academic achievement of our nation's struggling readers and writers, it is critical to remember that only 10% of students struggle with decoding or reading words accurately. This idea that a small minority, 10% of less of older students struggle at the text level, was repeated in these and other highly influential reports that may have shaped educators' understanding of the nature of secondary students' reading difficulties, appropriate instructional responses, and theoretical frameworks for subsequent scholarship. Indeed, in 2010, the Common Core State Standards were published. They included no standards for the continued development of phonic knowledge, multisyllabic word reading, or reading fluency beyond the 5th grade. So the Common Core State Standards may have reflected and communicated the understanding that these skills are already well developed among secondary students. But what does more contemporary research suggest about adolescent striving readers? The good news is there's a growing body of research looking at the instructional needs of these students at that below basic level. What are their needs? What is effective for teaching them? So let's look at some of that research now. Okay, there's just we'll look at 3 studies. There's so many, it was hard to choose, but when these research studies, we're going to just briefly overview, looked at adolescent struggling readers, middle school, high school students. So Hawk et al. In 2009, they looked at reading skill differences among a group of 9th grade students, 345 of them. And they found that among the students who were low in reading comprehension, 88% of them had word level difficulty with accuracy and automaticity and fluency. And just 12% had difficulty, were fluent, accurate readers, but had difficulty with vocabulary and comprehension. Very similarly, Clemens et al. Looked at the prevalence of low reading fluency and low vocabulary among students with low reading comprehension. And they found that 80% of the students had low fluency, and just 16% of students had average fluency but low vocabulary. And one more, Osland in 2018 and colleagues looked at the relationships between word identification, vocabulary, silent reading, and inference making to reading comprehension among a large group of middle school students, about 800. And they found that word identification skills most directly predicted reading comprehension difficulty and had a strong effect on each of the other skills measured. So this growing body of research is challenging prior understandings, and I'm not sure it's making its way into the field of education. I really like this quote by Clemens and colleagues. They just sum it up so nicely. Word and text level reading remain a primary and defining feature of adolescents' reading difficulties. That should not be a controversial statement. It's not where reading ends, but it is where reading begins for reading comprehension, that students are just not able to access the text accurately and quickly enough to build meaning as they read. So let's look into that a little bit. So in other words, students at that lowest level of proficiency on measures of comprehension, like the NAEP, the Vermont Cognia, difficulty reading text accurately, automatically, and fluently, is a hallmark of their challenges, not an exception found among just 10%. So remember, 30% of high school seniors, 33% of Vermont's eighth graders are at this lowest level of proficiency. And research strongly suggesting their difficulties, not their only difficulties, but a hallmark of their challenges, word and text level reading. All right, so why does that matter? Hebert has a wonderful paper out right now about automaticity, and she notes that most below basic students' reading rates are too slow to allow them to focus on comprehension fully. And so we know from this wonderful timeless graphic from Hollis Scarborough that word recognition skills need to become increasingly automatic over time to support skilled reading. And alongside that, language comprehension has to develop. What's interesting is for older struggling readers who've had a decade or more of challenges with reading, the very academic language they need to master they've not been able to access because that language is found in text. Let's look at that. So speech is lexically impoverished. Text level skills matter because they afford access to the academic language in text. So allow me to look at some of this research because it was the most impactful for the students at teachers at Mountain View's supervisory union to understand their students' challenges and how to respond instructionally. So Stanovich coined the term the Matthew effect in 1986 to explain this phenomenon. What happens when young students are not taught explicitly enough to get off to a good start in reading? That has a downward spiral of cascading effects on both text level skills, accuracy and automaticity, and language skills, vocabulary, syntax, and background knowledge. Whereas a good start in reading can start a virtuous upward cycle where reading is enjoyable. So students read more, they become more accurate and more automatic, and they are exposed to ever increasing volumes of academic language in text. Okay, then he developed this Matthew effect concept with the paper, What Reading Does for the Mind. Why is text so important to access? Speech, draw your eyes, if you would, to the bottom here, adult speech. Rare words per 1,000. How many academic words do we use when we're speaking? It turns out we don't speak above about the 4th grade level. Even expert witness testimony or college graduates to friends and spouses, 17 to 28, rare words per 1,000. But if you could just look at the top of the chart here, scientific articles have 128 rare words per 1,000. Newspapers, 68. Children's books have more rare words per 1,000 than expert testimony or college graduates speaking to each other. And these are not esoteric, rarely used words. These are the kinds of words that qualify as rare words per 1,000. Display, dominance, invariably, reluctantly. We don't use these words in speech very often. We might not use the word reluctant. We might say, I don't want to. We wouldn't say, I'm reluctant to. We wouldn't say, oh, invariably. We'd say, oh, without a doubt. Right? So academic language is found in text. That's where children are exposed to it. I'm going to stop talking now and let you read some final paragraphs from this paper in a second. Okay, but one more thing. So volume of reading. When students read a lot, students at the 98th percentile of achievement may read 65 minutes a day, and they're exposed to 4,358,000 words per year. And within those words is academic complex language and vocabulary. And you can see how even just a few minutes of reading can make a big difference in achievement. So students reading 3 minutes outside of school are exposed to 200,000 words per year, achieving at the 40th percentile. But if you just increase that up to maybe 9 minutes, they're at the 70th percentile due to their exposure to academic language. So let's take a break here, and I'd like you to read these last 3 paragraphs from this paper, and then I'm going to share with you what this kind of reading can sound like, what this difficulty with text level reading can sound like with an example from a student. So because of the Matthew effect, it becomes doubly imperative for precisely those children whose verbal abilities are most in need of bolstering. It's the very act of reading that can build those capacities, which leaves us as educators wondering, okay, so if they're having difficulty reading, and reading is where they're going to gain access to academic language, what can we do? I'd like to play for you, before I show you the text, a 2-minute recording of a student trying to read an excerpt from a speech by Charles Dickens. This student was very motivated, yet she consistently scored below proficient on measures of reading comprehension like the PSAT and STAR reading, for example. She was identified as needing help with accuracy and fluency when she moved to a school that understood they needed to screen for fluency when students are demonstrating difficulty. Her prior school and educators worked really hard at helping her, and their efforts were focused on comprehension and vocabulary, which of course are important. She did get the help she needed and eventually went on to early college. But here is a passage. Let's listen to her reading, and I'd like you to ask yourself while you're listening, could you answer the question, what is Dickens' motivation for writing? Or could you summarize his main points? Why or why not?
It is a difficult thing for a man to speak of himself or of his work, but perhaps on this occasion I may, without improperly venture to say a word on the spirit in which mine were conceived. I felt an earnest and humble desire, and shall do till I die, to increase the stock of harmless cheerfulness that wait I felt that the world was not utterly and wait okay I'm sorry, but the world was not utterly to be dis dispeased, um, that it was worthy of living, that it was worthy of living, and for many reasons. I was anxious to find that the professor has said, if I could, in evil things, that soul of goodness which the Creator has put in them. I was anxious to show that virtue may be found in the byways of the world, that it is not incompatible with poverty and every wages, and even wages.
I just wrote 1,000 questions to ask you, and I'm going to pose them, and I'm just going to ask you to place a few thoughts in the chat. Can you see how this student may not have read very much across the school day and school year? How she may not have been exposed to academic language? Do you have students with similar challenges? What do you want to be true for these students? Do you hear the Matthew effect? And the hallmark of older striving readers' difficulties in her voice? Or what do you think it feels to read like this? Okay, I'm just going to ask if you could place a few of your thoughts of what that may have felt like for her in the chat, or some of your reactions. Yeah, thank you, David. Absolutely. There it is, multisyllabic word reading. So students remember what they're thinking about. And what was she thinking about? You're right, David. She was thinking about what the words actually were, not what they meant. She was focusing just on reading. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's hard, but that we can help her, and we can help her quite effectively. So thank you for continuing to share your thoughts and speaking with each other in the chat. I'm going to move forward. And thank you, David. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so let's move on from what do we know about adolescent striving readers. We know that there's far too many of them to place them all in an intervention class. We know that their language development ends up often being diminished because of their lack of access to text. What do we know? Let's change that to what can we do? So let's pivot a little bit now to, so what can we do for these students that are ubiquitous in our classrooms, and as the data suggests, even in college? 1 in 5 students entering college are at that below basic level and struggle with fluency. Okay, I would suggest that we implement a whole school response. This is an all hands on deck moment. We need to reframe our conceptualization of MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, not as an intervention system, but as a system for continuous improvement to bolster universal core instruction first and foremost. So we're going to be using data to drive instruction to meet the needs of most of our students. If we've got more than 20% or so of our students who require intervention, and the data suggests we do, we cannot intervene our way out of that. We have to adapt our instruction that they receive in Tier 1 classes to meet their needs. Okay. So why begin at the beginning? That's where most students spend their time. So think about it. If you think of this, the teachers in your school, most of them are content area teachers. The National Center for Education Statistics noted that 75% of students with specific learning disabilities spend over 80% of their time in general education classes. So most struggling readers spend most of their time in general education settings. It really may be essential that all secondary teachers accurately understand their instructional needs and have some high leverage key routines to support them. So a central tenet of MTSS is that effective literacy instruction be integrated across the content areas and throughout the tiers of support. What differs between the tiers is not the presence or absence of evidence-based instruction, but rather the intensity with which it's delivered, the explicitness of it, and strategic instruction provided. And Tier 1 is the foundation, especially in small rural schools, such as those in Vermont. We have staffing, we have low numbers of staff in our schools, and the good news is that content area teachers can be highly effective in helping these students. We're going to look at that next. As we move forward, I'd like us to remember that intervention is not a place. Intervention is the instruction that we provide that meets our students' demonstrated needs as evidenced by data. A reading intervention is simply changing our instruction or intervening to improve learning. Intervention is not a place. Okay, so it's important to know that research is suggesting is effective for all educators, and especially their leaders who make instructional decisions and set professional learning priorities. Improving reading is not just for reading's sake. Improving literacy improves learning by ensuring students can access, learn, and master the complex language of their disciplines. Let's listen for a minute, half a minute, to Dr. Reed. She did a study that looked at general reading ability and science achievement.
Literacy development is critical to students' academic performance in school because most classes have something to do with reading and writing. There are vocabulary words that kids have to know for math class, for example. And in some of our research, we found that a student's literacy achievement accounts for as much as 70% of the variance in students' science performance in grades 5, 8, and in high school. So we know that there are long-term consequences of not being able to develop adequate reading skills to support academic learning.
70%, did you hear that, of science achievement is correlated with how well the students could read the science texts. So think about that research I shared about how text is where we find complex language. Science is a complex topic. Students need to be able to read to access that knowledge. And the better they can read, the more they can learn. So again, literacy is not just reading for reading's sake. The ability to read, write, speak, and listen impacts learning across the content areas. Some practices with evidence of effectiveness in content area classes. Let's look at a little bit of that. So this study, Wanzek, looked at relationships between 8th grade social studies teachers' instructional practices, time students spent reading text, and student achievement. And they found that increased time reading in social studies class positively correlated with improved content learning among the struggling readers in their sample. This study is really interesting. Gutierrez, de Bloom, and colleagues in 21. They found that middle school students in their sample who received evidence-based instruction in their math, science, and social studies classes achieved comprehension gains that were more than twice as large as their peers in the business as usual condition. And similarly, Sutherland and colleagues in England, they found that increased opportunities to read during 8th grade English classes in a 12-week study resulted in overall comprehension gains equivalent to 8.5 months of typical growth in a 12-week study. But like Gutierrez, what they found was students who were identified as struggling readers in their sample made gains that were twice as large, 16 months of growth in a 12-week study, by increasing the volume of reading that was happening in the classes. Now, evidence-based practices have been gathered in this unbelievable, amazing, excellent, incredible 2022 IES practice guide. Don't let the word intervention in the title make you think these practices are for Tier 2 alone, because remember, intervention is not a place. Intervention is changing our instruction to meet our students' needs. And what the researchers found, they looked at 99 studies, I believe, across 45 different conditions. They summarized the research and they suggested to improve older students' reading, we need to focus on 4 main things. We need to make sure the students can read the words accurately. So teach a routine for multisyllabic decoding. Embed spelling instruction in the lessons. Practice reading words with accuracy and automaticity. So make sure we have accuracy with reading. Make sure our students can read fluently. And how they suggest we provide a purpose for repeated readings. We have our students practice reading with prosody, and we read from a wide range of texts. Third, we want to focus on comprehension with a few high leverage practices, beginning with building word and world knowledge. So consistently providing students opportunities to ask and answer questions, writing just statements, for example, and monitoring comprehension while they read. So they have a few really well laid out comprehension instructional strategies, beginning with building word and world knowledge. So knowledge of vocabulary and background knowledge. And that we wrap all of that up with complex texts for all students. I cannot recommend this guide enough. I know we have an adolescent literacy crisis, and I think if we all read this report, studied it with our colleagues, that is the number one thing we could do to feel better equipped to know what to do for our students. So building leaders, if you want to look at your parents, students' parents and students in the eye and say, we are doing everything we can that evidence suggests is effective to improve literacy outcomes, you'll want to read this report. Don't be intimidated. It's 200 some odd pages, but the actual text is just 80 pages. It's 197 pages. It's 80 pages of content and the rest is all appendices. I can't recommend it enough. So here's the lead author, Sharon Vaughn. Let's listen to her for a minute and a half. She's finishing up a webinar, and she has just explained what's in this IES practice guide. And she's talking to parents and school leaders what to do next.
First of all, I want to say that if we want to know how to really improve reading comprehension, one of the ways we can do that is we can provide interventions for students. And if I ask many of you, are you right now in your schools, are parents, is your child involved in an intervention around reading comprehension? You might say yes. And I would say to you, this is really important. Reading comprehension interventions will always be necessary, but they will also always be inadequate. In order to really improve reading comprehension, you need school-wide approaches to enhancing these pressure points. What I mean by that is that all teachers in the school need to use the practices we just learned about to promote the science of reading comprehension. You cannot rely on intervention teachers to do it all. Every teacher, whether it's the first grade teacher, the fifth grade teacher, the middle school teacher, or the high school teacher, whether it's the social studies teacher or the English language arts teacher, these comprehension practices are not for intervention alone, but they are part of the school-wide approach. Here's the other thing about reading comprehension. Without enhanced word reading, in other words, we do have to make sure students have the foundations of word reading, vocabulary and background knowledge. Reading comprehension will remain underdeveloped. That's why it's a school-wide mission. So whether you're a parent or a teacher or a principal, the practices that I talked about today are ones that I encourage you to integrate school-wide. The second platform is that reading comprehension has to go across the entire content area. So we need school-wide approaches for enhancing vocabulary, background knowledge, and reading comprehension, not just in third grade English language arts, not just in fifth grade reading, but social studies and science. And you know who?
She goes on to say, and you know who's really good at teaching academic vocabulary is the math teachers. I just love that message from Dr. Sharon Vaughn. This is a school-wide mission. Let's see. So we're going to look at how we can, some concrete steps.
First of all, I want.
Let's see. Okay. So before we get into sharing some ways to implement this in our schools, implement the 4 suggested high leverage practices, making sure students can read the words accurately, making sure they can read fluently. high leverage, just a few comprehension strategies, and complex texts. Let's look at how prevalent these practices are or may be in our schools. So let's see. Stark and colleagues in 2023, they looked at evidence-aligned practices in middle school content area classes. Among the least frequently observed practices was time spent reading, 8% of observed minutes. 2/3 of lessons had no reading of connected texts longer than 2 sentences. This finding has been similar findings across the board. So Swanson and colleagues, they looked at instructional time allocation in middle and high school classrooms. They found that students spent an average of 10 and 15% of observed time on reading activities of any kind, talking eyeballs on text, reading the blackboard, listening to the teacher read, reading of any kind. And Wexler and colleagues looked at evidence-based literacy practices in high school science classrooms and found that 2% of the time, instructional time, was spent on text longer than a single paragraph, and less than 1% on strategy and 7% on vocabulary. Very interesting. So these data are suggesting that the teens are not reading very much. And all the evidence we've been looking at suggests that is a key leverage point that we can make. Let's just hear it from Sharon one more time. 20 seconds.
Platform number 3. This is super important. I put it in 2 words. The words are more reading. I just got to tell you, deliberate practice is the secret sauce to success around reading.
Okay, we're going to get to it now. But let's remember, we can watch a marathon, but that's not going to make us strong runners. We've got to lace up and get out there and do it every day. The same is true with reading. And I would propose to you that we may be running around looking for a magic wand to solve the adolescent literacy crisis. But I would suggest that for a majority of our students, the research might be suggesting that deliberate practice is where we should start. The teens are not reading very much. And when they are, we're not providing them with the kinds of practice in the skills that they need that are the primary and defining feature of their struggles, lifting the word off the page. That's not where literacy ends. No, no, no. But, right, what's read has to be understood. But we've also got to provide copious opportunities for students to improve these skills if they want to achieve high levels of sophisticated reading and academic language. Okay. So, how can we begin to intervene in Tier 1 content area classes without all of us being reading specialists? What can we do that evidence suggests will help our older striving readers alongside building and district leadership, right? We've got to invest in professional learning. So let's pick a few high leverage practices though to get started. We can't ask content area teachers to do it all and all at once, but since change happens one step at a time, which first steps are we going to choose? I propose that we select a small set of steps from the IES practice guide and support our colleagues in a collaborative whole school approach. So from the IES guide, we can pull 3 different routines that can be easily embedded into content area classes, what we're already doing and teaching. So remember, even though the guide has the word intervention in it, intervention's not a place. These routines can be connected to grade level or above content area learning. As Dr. Tatum reminds us, we want to focus on accelerating foundational skill development and knowledge development concurrently. The best place to do that is where students are learning content area classes. Okay, so folding in what we're already doing, we can teach a simple routine for multisyllabic word reading. We can do that. We can do that in art class. We can do that in driver's ed class. We can do that in math class, science, social studies, math. We can provide purposeful fluency practice seamlessly into what we're already doing and even increase student engagement. And we can build word and world knowledge with complex text for all students, making connections to grade level content. Let's look at each of these and I'll provide a few examples. So from the IS practice guide, they suggest we teach a routine for multisyllabic decoding. Here is the routine. I'll show you on the next slide with a word that should be familiar to you. Okay, so you want to select a few words from the grade level text to model and practice accurate reading. You could circle any prefixes and suffixes if you knew your prefixes and suffixes, but you don't have to. You can just underline the remaining vowel, underline the vowels or vowel teams in the word. You can loop under each syllable or word part as you read it, and then you can make it a real word by blending the parts together, and you can do that with your students. So for example, from that Charles Dickens text, impropriety, the student could not read this word, but let's see how could we have done that. If we knew morphology, and I have unfinished learning around morphology myself, if we understood the morphology of this word, we could circle the prefix im and the suffix iety. We could underline the remaining vowel. We could scoop and read. Impropriety, impropriety. Or we could just start with the vowels. I see these vowels. I'm going to scoop and read impropriety, and I'm going to turn it into a real word, impropriety. Now, an English teacher or a social studies teacher could simply have this word up on the board, and they could say the word. Class, the word we're going to read is impropriety. What word? Impropriety. Let's look at it. The teacher scoops it. Say it with me. Impropriety. Impropriety. What's this word? Impropriety. Took 10 seconds. There it is. Breaking that word up into pieces. If that happened in every class once or twice, that routine would be internalized by students, and they would have a method or a means of decoding words that they don't currently have. And I want to show you, we can connect that with building word knowledge. Okay, so we can connect this multisyllabic decoding with vocabulary instruction and build word knowledge. Here is a template from the 2022, or based on the 2022 practice guide, and we're using this at Mountain View's Supervisory Union. So you have a word, you provide a student-friendly definition, talk about the morphology if you can, add it to your word wall, use it, do all that great practice and interleaving and coming back, make an interactive word wall, but you're introducing the word, you're going to have an image, some example sentences, and in a sentence from the text, and then some questions around it. Here's what it could look like with impropriety. Okay, class, we're going to read the word impropriety. What word? Impropriety. Let's scoop and read it. Impropriety. They're doing it with me. Impropriety. Okay, it's the state of not being proper or of engaging in inappropriate behavior or conduct. We could talk about im means not, proper is suitable for purpose, and iety is state or condition. Avoid impropriety. Use appropriate language at school. Class, read this sentence with me. The principal addressed the impropriety of using language in school. When you have students in high school, you don't need to make a big deal out of it and make it artificial. You just say, let's read. And you start reading and they read with you. Just let's read. You put your finger under where you want to start. Let's read. And you do it. And as they do more and more of it, it becomes easier and easier, and they're all reading at one time. Class, this next sentence is from a text we're about to read. It's a doozy. Do you see the word impropriety in it? You might pull it out. Let's read. It is a difficult thing, right? You just go through and you read it, and everyone's reading with you. And then you might ask some questions. Yes or no? Is this demonstrating impropriety? The questions you ask may be nuanced. They might be, I don't know, maybe, it depends. They might depend on what your students already know. Maybe you've covered what insider trading is. I don't know. But you just would ask them questions. That you could do with 1 or 2 words, but not all of them in a text. You can provide purposeful fluency practice. You can model fluent reading. You can echo read. Class, this text is a doozy. I'm going to read it. You repeat it. And you just do 1 or 2 sentences at a time. You can do choral reading, where everyone's just reading the text out loud together. That's a let's read. And you can do partner reading. And partner reading is really quite fun once you dive in and give your students the me or we option. Anita Archer talks about this. Students can have a short passage of text. Let's dive into what Dickens has to say before we write our just statements and analyze it. Partner up, and you've got a routine in your classroom, me or we option. So if the student doesn't want to read solo, they just say we. And they'll choose that a lot, even strong readers. It's fun to read together. So let's do it together. So they might say, we're going to go we. If they want to read it on their own, they can choose the me option. Now, what if we pulled this all together? This is the text that the student had difficulty with. I played you the recording at the beginning. What if, before we started, we previewed the vocabulary words? Okay? Friends, we're going to look at some of these challenging multisyllabic words together. I've got it on the board. I've got my finger or my pointer. Let's read the word parts, and then let's read the whole word. Ready? And you say impropriety. The word is impropriety. Venture, venture. Conceived, conceived. Earnest, earnest. Despised, despised. And everybody's reading. Everybody. No one's singled out. Everyone's reading. Anxious, anxious. Soul, soul. Okay, so they've previewed the vocabulary. This takes 15 seconds. Now you can have the student echo read it if you wanted to. I'm going to model what I think Dickens, what his voice might have been like to try and bring meaning to this passage. I'd like you to read it after me. We'll go sentence at a time. You could do choral reading. Everyone reads at the same time. Remember, teachers can simply just say, let's read. And they do. It's fun. Seriously, it's scary to get started, but it's working. They do it. You can do the partner reading. Remember, we can say me or we. We always have that me or we option. And then you dive into the meaning. Now you're ready for that close reading. So previewing the words, you can pull out a few that might have a central meaning. You can use that template, have an image, talk about examples and non-examples, and then you can preview this vocabulary before you dive into the fluent, accurate reading. Note how we're going to be reading from the content of our classes. So we have just another point here. We're going to connect reading fluency to building word and world knowledge with knowledge building text sets. Because of that Matthew effect, striving readers often don't know what good readers know. So we can't activate background knowledge if they don't have it. So we can build background knowledge. So let's replace that word activate with build. We're going to build background knowledge. And one way we can do it is we keep the challenging text at the heart of what we're doing. And we can surround it with brief readings that we can read for fluency, accuracy, and vocabulary, such as visual or video. We can do brief informational texts. We can do accessible texts like photo essays to build knowledge around that text. So let's see. This is what it could look like with Great Expectations from Charles Dickens. Let's say we were reading that. We could build our students' background knowledge with a photo essay. Victorian daily life, what was it like? We could read an article about industrialization. We could watch a brief video about the Industrial Revolution. And we can read a story from Charles Dickens' life of what it was like to work in a factory. This is just one example. This could be about Van Gogh, if you were an art teacher, Einstein, Newton, particle accelerators, Pythagoras. You can do text sets about anything, but it's a great way to build knowledge. They're brief to support the complex text, so they work great for fluency. You can be previewing the multisyllabic words as a class and learning vocabulary. You can connect that all with what we're already doing in our content area classes. Okay, so key idea. We can begin with a small set of these high leverage practices for every student in every class every day. We can focus on these evidence-based practices to ensure intervention is happening in our content area classes. And in general, we need to reconsider this inoculation fallacy. So Snow and Mohay coined this term, the idea that students learn to read and then they read to learn. They note that the need for literacy instruction doesn't end in the 3rd grade or even in high school. The data are really suggesting some students require 12 years of instruction. We can't assume if you've never been in 10th grade chemistry that you can read a 10th grade chemistry text, but we can help make that text accessible to you by previewing the words, practicing reading them with fluency, deep diving into their vocabulary, and building text sets around our content to deepen our knowledge. So I would suggest we reconsider this inoculation fallacy, that we provide ongoing instruction. I would like to do away with that moniker, learn to read, then read to learn. The data suggests that that's not a real thing. Many students require ongoing instruction, and we need to improve our teacher and leader preparation to provide this kind of instruction. We need to infuse the content areas where knowledge is being built with these strategies. Why? Because evidence is showing it's highly effective. Literacy is not just for ELA class, and intervention is not a place. And when we provide additional supports for our most striving readers, we need to reconsider the homework hotel. We need to be, and minimally guided instruction, we need to be highly explicit and interactive using direct instruction methods to teach these foundational skills explicitly, to support the instruction in foundational skills that's happening in Tier 1. And in closing, I'm going to leave you with a few of my favorite things, and then we'll have a few minutes for question and answer. These are all free resources to guide your next steps. I would suggest you begin with leadership at the district and building level, principals and teacher leaders. You're going to resolve to graduate fully literate students and work to improve our systems relentlessly, like our students' lives depend on it, because they do. So read these IES practice guides. This webinar by Anita Archer is phenomenal. She just lays out how you can implement some of the practices I've talked about today in every class. And we're using this as our guidepost at Mountain Views. We read the IES practice guide. And this webinar, we're starting with every day in every class, students are going to read, write, and speak, and we're supporting our teachers in implementing that. The Reading League's Adolescent Literacy Compass page is chock full of wonderful resources for leaders and for teachers. And you've got to check out this secondary literacy modules and resources from Jessica Teredas. They're free, they're new, they're incredible. And you could use them. They come with professional learning that go with each step. And she takes you through each of the MTSS steps. Cannot recommend her enough. And last but not least, you could join us at the Project for Adolescent Literacy, where we're hoping to gather and spotlight what's working to support and lift up adolescent literacy teachers across the country. If you'd like to learn more about literacy at Mountain View Supervisory Union, this is a webinar that our content area teachers just presented this spring to student achievement partners. And it's the high school teachers themselves talking about how they're implementing these very things we talked about today. I have a website that outlines soup to nuts, my Tier 3 intervention program. with lots of webinars and podcasts on there as well. And the process of literacy change at Mountain View Supervisory Union is laid out in this webinar with Jennifer Settle and Sherry Sousa. Here are my references, which you'll have in the handout, and I thank you all so much for listening and considering adolescent literacy.
Julie, thank you so much. You were one of the very early champions of the Vermont Reading League chapter, and you've done right by our chapter and our state today. So huge thank you for that presentation. Mindful of folks' time, I want to quickly, as we bridge to any burning questions, we have time for just a couple, and I encourage you to put them in the chat. I want to also draw your attention to a couple of things that are about to hit the chat. First is that the Vermont Reading League is having a little in-person get-together very soon, and we're going to put the information about that in the chat for you if you're fired up after Julie's talk and you want to get together and do some planning and some priority setting as part of this free membership-driven organization. I encourage you to grab that information from the chat. There's a quick little form to tell us that you're coming, and we would love to have you here in Williston if convenient for you. There are also links to our resources that the Reading League Vermont has compiled. So very much hope you will continue the learning. And let's take a moment then to turn to the question, what do you think about teaching sentence complexity? Julie, a couple of quick thoughts on teaching sentence complexity?
Yeah, I think teaching at the sentence level and the paragraph level is really important. The Writing Revolution is a nice resource for that. I use in my writing class From Talking to Writing from Landmark Outreach. It's similar to the Writing Revolution. And I have to apologize, I was reading the clock wrong. I thought we had 5 minutes left. My bad, I'm so sorry.
No problem.
So the sentence complexity, yes, absolutely. Sentences can be 40 words long in print, and in speech they're really not. They're quite truncated. So being able to follow what's happening in a sentence and what things are referring to is a skill that we do need to teach explicitly, and it helps with reading comprehension tremendously. And that's can be folded into the IES guide when they talk about writing gist statements. You can write gist statements even on one complex sentence. So thank you for the question.
That's great. Lots of thank yous for all the rich content that you shared today, and wonderful, clear recommendations for next steps. I appreciate very much that you are urging us to direct application to practice. That is what we need to make a difference. Information as well about completing a quick survey about today's webinar, which also links to the certificate of attendance that we're happy to send you once we get your survey back. So a big thank you again to Julie and to all of you for your attention and commitment to the critical issue of adolescent literacy and to the Vermont Reading League. Thank you, everyone.